Special thanks to Mecha Japan for sponsoring today's video. So, we've ranked the Thousand Year Blood War Arc captains by their performance in the war, and we've looked at how well the Sternritter did in comparison too. But what happens if we shift gears a bit? Let's dial back the clock to the Arrancar Arc instead, and take a look at how Aizen's Espada performed in their battle against the Gotei 13, because I think it's going to be an interesting and potentially eye-opening list. Despite their immense, enduring popularity, the Espada are also infamous for their almost universally bad performance in the war with the Shinigami, and as a result it almost feels like the criteria by which we judge them has to be completely adjusted in comparison to the Thousand Year Blood War arc. The truth of the matter is that the stakes are far, far higher in the final arc, and you feel it. While I love the Arrancar arc dearly, going back to it in the wake of the Quincy Blood War makes it feel like a playground scuffle in stark contrast. Obviously, not a single character on the side of the Gotei 13 dies, that's been well documented over the years, but it goes beyond that. They barely even lose. I've said it before that I would love to see characters like Baraggan in the Thousand Year Blood War arc, where Kubo wasn't so afraid of really sticking it to the heroes in a big way. I honestly think he'd thrive. I think a bunch of the Espada would. We'd absolutely see a huge wave of Shinigami officers reduced to skeletons at one point or another, giving Respirar the showing such an awesome ability likely deserved. And again, the same can be said for a number of the Espada's powers. But alas, that's not what happened, and it's not why we're here. We're here to judge the Espada based on their performance in the Arrancar arc, for better or worse, and I'm going to do my best to once again take everything into account here, just as I did with those two previous rankings. As a result, I'll also be taking into account the negative ways in which the Espada affected Aizen's war effort, although there is considerably less team killing going on here than we saw within the Sternritter. So without further ado, let's rank the Espada by their performance in the Arrancar arc. Before we get started, consider hitting subscribe down below if you haven't done already. Again, your support really does make the absolute world of difference, and check out Mr. Tomo Talks Games as well if you're into gaming discussions about the games industry, Souls-likes, anything like that. Again, your support would be massively appreciated over there. We just hit 13,000 subs, so to all of the new subscribers who have come over from this channel, I really do thank you all so very much. And so, first up, unfortunately, is the third Espada, Tia Harubel, who it honestly seems like just can't catch a break. This is a character who, I'll be honest, I always expected to rank fairly low on this list, but upon actually getting a holistic look at what she achieves in the war, it was pretty shocking. As one of the top 3 Espada, Harubel doesn't do anything until the Fate Karakura Town arc, which is fair enough. But once she's there, she has by far the weakest showing of the 3 Espada, and doesn't really accomplish anything against the Gotei 13 and their allies, resulting, in my opinion, in the worst performance of any of the Espada. Things start out pretty good. Harubel manages to overpower Hitsugaya even once the captain activates Bankai, but, as we've discussed before on this channel, as soon as she then uses her Resurrection, things go rapidly and completely downhill for the character, as she is hard countered by Hitsugaya's Zanpakuto, resulting in a back and forth battle in which she fails to even land a scratch on the captain from this point onwards. I'm serious, every single time it looks like Harubel has achieved something, anything, it is completely undone. She slashes Hitsugaya in half? Too bad, it's an ice clone. She drowns him with her Cascader ability? Too bad, he's frozen it and is totally fine. All of this leads to Hitsugaya casually defeating the Espada by sealing her in his ultimate attack, Hyoten Hyakuso. Even once Harubel is later freed by Wonder Weiss's scream and she is confronted by not only Hitsugaya, but Hiyori and Lisa too, nothing really happens here. Their fight simply does not last long enough for Harabel to achieve anything. By the time Hitsugaya and Hiyori stop arguing and actually enter the battle, which we see happen by the way, because Harabel is only facing Lisa before Hitsugaya and Hiyori join the fray, Aizen decides he's had enough, and he betrays Harabel there and then, cutting down the last of the top 3 Espada with ease. If we were to try and extract something, anything from this performance, I guess you could say, well, she did outlast Starrk and Baraggan, but in terms of what she did for the Arrancar's war effort, it all amounted, sadly, to nothing at all. And so that is the last place character on our list. Before we continue, however, first, a word from today's sponsor. With the final core of the 1000-Year Blood War Arc anime on the way, now might be a good time to stock up on some brand new Bleach merch. And Mecha Japan is just the place to do it. Mecha Japan is an online store that sells products from major Japanese licenses such as Nintendo, Capcom, Sega, and of course Shonen Jump. With a catalogue of more than 50,000 high-quality products straight from Japan, you can be sure to find something you like. For me, I love the Bleach figures, such as the Stirring Souls line, which look really nice, particularly this Kenpachi figure, modelled after a panel straight from his battle with Ichigo. To be honest, there's a bunch of cool products to be found on the website, including the Japanese volumes of the manga, whose covers I've always personally preferred, Bleach Union Arena booster packs and single cards, and if you are looking to get some merch in celebration of the anime, then there are various 1000-Year Blood War Arc specific figures too, including bankai versions of Renji and Rukia, so if you're interested in getting some Bleach merch of your own, or really any kind of merch, including some very rare items that are even listed as such on the website, some of which can only be found on Mecha Japan, then make sure to visit the site using my link in the description or the pinned comment. Not only are the prices great, but they offer worldwide shipping too. Plus, by visiting my link, you can use my exclusive discount code Ichigo10 to get $10 off of orders greater than $100. Make sure to follow Mecha Japan's socials to stay up to date with everything they stock, and let me know down in the comments what you decide to pick up. Thanks everyone, and thanks again to Mecha Japan for sponsoring today's video. Okay, so moving on, up next we have, perhaps unsurprisingly, the 9th Espada, Aranjero Ararueri, who, to be fair to him, does the absolute best with the very limited screen time he has. Aranjero barely lasts a volume's worth of chapters and only gets to fight one opponent, Rukia, but boy does he make it count. Aranjero's battle with Rukia is a ruthless and bloody affair, and the Espada pushes her to the very brink of death in a way very few other Espada manage to achieve. Now, you could argue Rukia isn't the most powerful character in the arc by a long way, but on the flip side, neither is Aranjero. In fact, as far as the rankings go, he is the weakest of the bunch. Wielding Cayenne's Nejibana, Aranjero disarms and impales Rukia with the Vice-Captain's trident after a savage battle, almost killing her as a result. Frankly, Rukia's victory has always been a little bit contrived in my opinion, but she wins nonetheless, stabbing the Espada through the head, and that's why I feel I have to rank Aranjero this low overall. Although he does manage to deal some real damage to his opponent, ultimately he dies in the process, which is a pretty big knock against him. And to make matters even worse, Rukia, of course, survives, even though it looks a little touch and go for a while. Still, Aranjero manages to take Rukia out of the fight for a little while anyway, which is more than a few of the Espada can say. And so, I guess the real reason for his placement being this low is just the small-scale nature of his achievement, but it's an achievement all the same. Okay, moving on, next up we have the 7th Espada, Zomari Larue, and honestly this is where the placements are already starting to get a little tricky, because unlike the captains, and unlike the Sternritter for the most part, the Espada are actually ranked. They are sorted by numerical rank, which means it's really only fair to have different expectations for different Espada depending on the rank. For example, let me break down this dilemma that I'm having for you. I have Zamari here on the list because he successfully wounds Byakuya to the point of forcing the captain to use bankai, and he also takes down Hanataro. Now, a couple of positions above Zamari on the list, spoilers, is Baraggan, for successfully taking Soifon's arm and later taking Hachi's arm as well as taking early command of that final battle. Now, let's be real. Taking an arm, especially in Bleach, is inherently less impressive than actually removing a character from the fight, like Zamari does to Hanataro. But then there are so many variables to consider here. It's just not that black and white. Injuring characters of Soifon and Hachi's caliber is simply more impressive than defeating Hanataro. But then, Baraggan is ranked a whole 5 spots above Zamari in terms of the Espada. So we should expect that from him. Should we have expected a lot more from him, in fact? And so, in that sense, should Baraggan be ranked lower than Zamari? This is why the Espada is the hardest faction to rank in this way, I think. But let's, for simplicity's sake, leave it as it is for now. Zamari takes on Byakuya and manages to injure the captain, forcing him to slash his own arm and leg, which by the way is better than, say, Xyloporo manages against his captain opponent, and pushes him to use bankai. Even after Byakuya uses bankai, Zamari manages to survive an otherwise pretty devastating strike, but is swiftly defeated afterwards. Earlier in the fight, as I mentioned before, Zamari uses his power to take control of Rukia and has her cut down Hanataro, which probably represents, I'd say, his biggest success overall, though again, as I said earlier, is defeating Hanataro all that impressive? Okay, up next we have not Baraggan, but the 5th Espada, Neutra Gilga, who manages to defeat a few characters, yes, but they are all under dubious circumstances, save for one, and let's start there. Although even this one, I think, is questionable. After Chad defeats Gantenbane, he runs right into Neutra, who proceeds to take him out in a single hit. As you'll probably see soon enough, defeating Chad is not a particularly impressive feat for an Espada, but still, it happened all the same. And interestingly, despite having just come off his battle with Gantenbane, Chad didn't really appear to be injured at all here, though, I mean, he must have been. But that's why I think this is the least dubious of Neutra's wins, because the thing with Neutra is that he doesn't believe in honour in combat, and so that's where the majority of his so-called victories come from. He preys on opponents who are fresh out of battle, weakened and vulnerable. Later, Neutra wipes out an injured Grimmjow, which counts as a point against him in regards to sustaining the Arrancar war effort, a rare instance of genuine backstabbing among the Espada, the type that is absolutely rife within the Sternritter, and then faces off with Ichigo, who again is still seriously wounded from his duel with the aforementioned Grimmjow. So, while Neutra does overpower and defeat Ichigo, it's not really as big a deal as it should be, because Ichigo is already incredibly injured. And once Nell transforms into her adult self, she proceeds to turn the tables on Neutra in a big way. Although he proves stronger than she was expecting, the truth is that she still manages to achieve a lot against him in a short amount of time. And once again, Neutra doesn't defeat Nell per se, he just gets very lucky that she reverts back to her child form out of the blue. And then, of course, Neutra faces off against Kenpachi, finally a battle where he is forced to take on his opponent when they are at full health, and admittedly does hold his own fairly well. Kenpachi is quite weak here in comparison to his 1000-Year Blood War Arc self, but still, it is a brutal, grueling battle, where Neutra manages to get one over the captain numerous times, with victory almost looking assured at points, until all of a sudden it isn't, and Neutra is killed by Kenpachi's kendo swing. Actually going back and looking over Neutra's placement, this is all pretty bad. What does he actually achieve? He defeats Chad, sure, which is the closest thing to a legitimate victory that he has, and even when he defeats Ichigo, Orihime just heals him back up on the sidelines of Neutra's battle with Kenpachi anyway. It changed absolutely nothing about the trajectory of the war. In fact, the one person who stays down for a prolonged period of time after coming into contact with Neutra is Grimmjow, his own teammate. This is what's so fascinating to me about doing this video. These are really cool characters, the community loves them. The Espada are everlastingly popular, but looking at them in the actual context of the arc narrative is kind of mind-blowing, especially when you do compare them to the Sternritter list that we did not that long ago. Neutra achieves virtually nothing, and as a result we simply have to judge him based on the quantity of things he does, not the quality. And him giving Kenpachi an actual difficult battle, on top of defeating Chad and beating up Ichigo and I guess going toe-to-toe with Nell, I guess it's enough to keep him here in this spot, but I'm not overly happy about it. And then, yeah, here he is. Up next we have the second Espada, Baraggan Louisenbahn, who I really feel like should have been much higher, based on his powers, based on his stature within the lore, but like Harabel, this is another Espada who is ultimately done pretty dirty in the Fate Karakura Town arc. Now, to be fair to Baraggan, once Aizen is imprisoned in Yamamoto's Jokaku Enjo, the second Espada quickly takes command of the Arrancar forces and immediately locates the Gote 13's 4 pillars, dispatching his Fraction to deal with the Shinigami. And let's be fair here, it's not really his fault. They all ultimately lose, again without really achieving anything. Poe does manage to destroy a pillar, but even the effects of that are undone instantly. And it's totally wild to think that this is the furthest the Espada managed to advance until Aizen himself is forced to take over. In his initial battle with Soifon and Omaida, Baraggan completely overwhelms Soifon, even going so far as to demonstrate his time-manipulating powers by effortlessly breaking her arm. The stage is set then for a truly terrifying villain, one that's only exacerbated by the reveal of his Resurrection and his signature ability Respirar. Upon releasing his Zanpakuto, Baraggan immediately catches Soifon and rots her arm to the bone, in what is one of the single most effective showcases of an Espada's power to date. But sadly, the character completely peaks here in terms of his overall performance in the war. Baraggan does force Soifon to use bankai and even manages to negate the missile itself, but spends the rest of the battle languidly hanging around and barely fighting back, even once Hachi gets involved. And yes, Baraggan does manage to rot Hachi's arm as well, but in the grand scheme of things, it is a meaningless injury. I guess you could argue Hachi is taken out of the fight, but it's not really Baraggan's doing. He spends the rest of his time in the arc trying to stabilise Hiyori until Unohana arrives, which by the way is something he can apparently do with only the one arm. To compound things, Baraggan rotting Hachi's arm actually leads to the Espada's death, so yeah, all things considered, it's just not a great performance, especially when you reflect on how strong it all started out for the character. But moving into the top half of the list now, I have the 6th Espada, Grimmjow Jaeger Jaquez. Now, before you say anything, allow me to explain my reasoning. Let's look at what Grimmjow does. During his first trip to the human world, he effortlessly takes out Rukia before battling Ichigo. And while Grimmjow does handily have Ichigo under control for the majority of this fight, it's actually not quite as one-sided as it may appear when all is said and done. Ichigo ends up getting the final word here, dealing Grimmjow a serious injury that looks way worse in the manga. And of course what makes this all the more severe is the fact Grimmjow's expedition cost Aizen 5 Arrancar, as his entire unit of Fraction are killed. Now you could argue as well that, Baraggan brings his army of 6 Fraction to the Fate Karakura Town battle and they're all wiped out, but that was presumably an order given by Aizen. This is something unsanctioned that Grimmjow just decided to do. But, you know, luckily for him, Aizen doesn't really care, but still. When Grimmjow returns to the human world, he battles both Ichigo and Rukia once again getting the upper hand, only this time Shinji intervenes and completely overwhelms the Espada. Later, Grimmjow kills Luffy to restore his rank, though this doesn't really feel detrimental to Aizen's overall war effort since he basically manipulated the situation in the first place and then beats up Lowly, while going so far as to practically kill Meneley. When Ulquiorra confronts Grimmjow, Grimmjow imprisons the Espada, and at this point I think it's fairly obvious that Grimmjow has gone rogue. While he was never one to follow orders, it's clear now that the only thing on his mind is defeating Ichigo, resulting in maybe Grimmjow's biggest mistake when it comes to aiding the Arrancar's overall war effort. He allows Orihime to save Ichigo's life. And so it's clear that he doesn't care about the Arrancar's overall war effort, but that's still what he's being judged against. That's really what drops Grimmjow, in my opinion. Grimmjow is a loose cannon who's eventually only out for himself, and he ends up losing to Ichigo in their final battle anyway. But just missing out on the top 3, one of, again, if not maybe the most difficult Espada to rank, and that's the 10th or 0 Espada, Yami Largo. Yami's a tough one because he is heavily involved throughout the entire arc. He is perhaps the Espada we see fighting the most when everything is said and done. As a result, he is all over the place in terms of his performance. On the one hand, he maybe defeats the most characters of all the Espada, but on the other hand, not only are those characters that he defeats fairly small fry in the grand scheme of things, but he also takes more beatings than any other Espada too. Plus, to compound the issue further, no other character actively attacks and wipes out more of his own teammates than Yami, so we're left in an admittedly weird place. To begin then, Yami makes quite the splash, not only killing a bunch of Karakura town residents, but quickly decimating Chad, tearing his arm to pieces. Now this is Chad before he's trained with Kisuke, but still. Yami also defeats Ichigo, but again only because White was getting in our hero's way at the time. Without his intervention, Ichigo was cleaning the Espada up pretty nicely. Of course, it's clear that power levels are kind of all over the place at the start of the Arrancar arc due to the fluctuations in Ichigo's Ryoryoku, but Yami does earn himself a couple of wins early on, even wiping out Orihime with a single swipe. That being said, Yami then gets absolutely battered by Yoroichi and has to be rescued from Kisuke by Ulquiorra. Afterwards, Yami kills Roka for no reason whatsoever, who was reattaching his arm, only to then get beaten up again, this time by Urahara. When it comes to the end of his story, Yami wipes out Lowly and Meneley for absolutely no reason, before being humiliated by Uryu. However, upon activating his Resurrection, Yami actually does a decent job of defending Hueco Mundo to begin with, defeating Chad, Rukia, and Renji all at once. And he even gets the better of Ichigo, who can no longer holofy. Of course, once Byakuya and Kenpachi enter the scene, Yami is consistently and thoroughly embarrassed by them, but I guess you could argue he does keep both of them busy, or else they'd have likely gone to Karakura Town with Ichigo and Unohana. So yeah, Yami is a real tricky one to rank. He's all over the place, both good and bad, and the reason I'm content is because although he does defeat a bunch of characters, truth be told, as I said, they're all kind of small fry. Alright, but as we arrive at the top 3 Espada, these are the 3 best performing Espada in regards to furthering the Arrancar's war effort. And in 3rd place, we have the 8th Espada, Xyloporo Granz, who again is difficult to place. But that being said, I feel fairly confident because for as long and as arduous as Xyloporo's battle is in the manga, at the very least, he defeats both Renji and Uryu legitimately. Unlike Neutra, who doesn't defeat anyone that hasn't already been involved in a battle mere moments prior, Xyloporo fights Renji and later Uryu right from the off. They are both raring to fight and at full health, and the 8th Espada takes them down. Although the scenario is later made into a bit of a joke once Mayuri arrives, the stakes are effectively removed, that isn't Xyloporo's fault. He subjects both Renji and Uryu to some genuinely grave injuries. Beforehand, Xyloporo sets loose the Exequius on the fallen Privaron Espada, harvesting their bodies for his research. This is kind of a weird point. It could be argued that he's actively hindering Aizen's war effort by killing off some potentially able soldiers like Dordoni for instance, but it's also made fairly clear that at least Dordoni and Sarucci are for all intents and purposes totally done for, so I'm not sure that really had an impact. And then of course Xyloporo comes up against Mayuri, and does get steamrolled without really putting up much of a fight. But again, it's also not really fair either, with Mayuri being who he is. It's not Xyloporo's fault that Mayuri is apparently capable of replacing his organs to counter Xyloporo's resurrection barely an hour after first seeing it. And don't forget that Xyloporo effectively killed Nemu, thanks to his Gabriel ability, using her body to restore himself to life. And yeah, again, while Mayuri completely undoes this, that's just who he is. Realistically, he could have prepared for battle with any of the Espada. So for now, I'm decently happy with having Xyloporo sit here on the list. But in second place we have an Espada whose efforts often either go underrated or overlooked entirely, at least in my opinion, especially when you consider, as we have done previously in this video as with Yami, the caliber of opponents that he's up against, and that's the first Espada, Coyote Starrk. Now, don't get it wrong, Starrk could have been even more impressive and even more vital to the war effort if he'd actually tried, but in some sense that makes what he does achieve even more noteworthy. Before he does any fighting though, Starrk helps Aizen to immediately recapture Orihime, snatching her from right under Ichigo and Kenpachi's noses. Later he battles Kyoraku and doesn't sustain a single injury, even after releasing his Zanpakuto once Ukitake joins the fray, effectively transforming it into a 2v1 duel. Not only is Starrk capable of keeping up with both Kyoraku and Ukitake, the two of them using their Shikai, but he's able to read them like a book, and even figures out Ukitake's Shikai instantly. When Wonder Weiss arrives, Starrk is able to quickly adapt to the situation and uses the confusion to blast Kyoraku with a Sero at point-blank range, taking the Elder Captain out of the fight, at least temporarily. Once the Vizard join the battle, Starrk has, in my opinion, by far the most impressive showing of the top three Espada. He takes on both Love and Rose at the same time, two captain-level Vizard, and defeats them, unequivocally, without really breaking a sweat, eventually using his true power to overwhelm and destroy them. Even with both characters using a combination of their holification and Shikai, neither Love nor Rose can get anywhere near Starrk, and he even prepares to finish them off. Of course, Kyoraku returns to eventually kill the Espada, but even that isn't easy. Kyoraku is forced to backstab Starrk to weaken him, and Stark's resolve crumbles. But even then, Starrk is able to continue to read Kyoraku's Shikai and keep fighting until the end. Earlier during the fight, Kyoraku admits to Ukitake that he's even about to use bankai as he finds himself overrun by Seros. This isn't your average run-of-the-mill bankai usage like you'd see from Hitsugaya, Komamura, or even Byakuya. This would have been pretty special, and the fact that Kyoraku even goes so far as to admitting that is a testament to how dangerous Starrk is. Starrk is definitely another victim of circumstance. Were this the 1000-Year Blood War arc, he'd have likely taken both Love and Rose out of the war altogether, masked masculine style, but instead Kubo wanted everyone to fight Aizen. The same goes for either Kyoraku or Ukitake. Kubo was clearly withholding their bankai here. Were it the final arc, Starrk would have definitely faced one or both of them. In that sense, Starrk does feel kind of analogous to Masked Masculine in terms of his performance. It's just because of the nature of the arc they are featured in, Mask gets to go that one step further, and ultimately looks way more impressive as a result. And so again, the Primera is a tricky one, but I think considering the league of opponents he was up against, this is absolutely the second most impressive performance from the Espada. He doesn't really make any fumbles either. Kyoraku had to sneak attack him from behind to get Starrk into a position where he could lose, and he even helps Aizen lure Ichigo back to Las Noches by kidnapping Orihime again. However, the top performing Espada of the arc was obvious from the moment I began preparing this video, and of course it's none other than the fourth Espada, Ulquiorra Schiffer. If you ever needed proof that Ulquiorra was designed to be the main villain of the arc just below Aizen, well, this is it. Ulquiorra is the Espada who achieves and receives everything from the narrative. Initially, Ulquiorra arrives in Karakura town, and while he doesn't do much, he saves Yami's life from Kisuke's oncoming blast. Later, he relays the information he gathered to Aizen and the rest of the Arrancar thanks to his special eye. When Aizen sends Ulquiorra on a special mission later on, the Espada completes it with 0 issues, confronting and blackmailing Orihime into joining the Arrancar in Hueco Mundo. Once in Hueco Mundo, Ulquiorra battles Ichigo himself, and is notable for not only overpowering the main character, but actually delivering a finishing blow, impaling Ichigo in the chest and nearly killing him. Yes, Ulquiorra should have probably finished him off, making that age-old villain mistake. But for maybe the first time ever in this series, the first and only time, he's actually given the chance to rectify this mistake later on, and does so in spectacular fashion. Afterwards, he attempts to prevent Grimmjow from actually healing Ichigo's wounds, but finds himself imprisoned as a result. Once the final battle begins, Ulquiorra breaks free of the seal and is given command of Las Noches by Aizen himself. With the final battle underway, Ulquiorra takes down Ichigo yet again and achieves what no other Espada could. He actually kills his opponent. After a lengthy and bloody battle, Ulquiorra reveals his unprecedented Segunda Etapa and blows a giant hole through Ichigo's chest, ending our hero's life. This is a huge achievement, really for any villain, putting Ulquiorra in a class of his own, and up there with 1000-Year Blood War arc bad guys. Ironically, it's this act that ends up being the Espada's undoing, as Ichigo resurrects with Zangetsu's help and tears Ulquiorra apart. And what happens next is also a bit of a weird consideration we have to make. Does Ulquiorra help or hinder the Arrancar war effort by rescuing Ichigo? Again, I have to assume he didn't know he was going to rescue Ichigo, he was just doing what he thought he had to in that moment, to at least just try and stop or slow down Zangetsu. But what would have happened if Zangetsu was allowed to just go on an instinctual rampage throughout Hueco Mundo? Presumably Yami would have been defeated, but it also would have opened up an interesting can of worms for the rest of the Gotei 13 to deal with. To be honest, this is an outcome no one could have foreseen. Ulquiorra really had no idea what was going on here, and none of what happens is really his fault either, which is crucial. And so yeah, I think it's fairly obvious that Ulquiorra deserves to take the top spot today. Him successfully killing a hero, even if it's only temporary, pretty much secures that placement alone. But also he bests Ichigo not once, but twice. Ulquiorra is kind of the antithesis to Grimmjow in that sense. Both characters are defined by their engagements, their entanglements with Ichigo, but unlike Grimmjow, whose performance in the war is hampered overall by the fact he never truly successfully defeats Ichigo, despite focusing everything in on that, Ulquiorra fights and defeats Ichigo twice. Alright everyone, but that's it for today's video. As always, I do hope you enjoyed it. I hope you took something of value away from it as well. I'd love to hear thoughts down in the comments below. I imagine this might be a contentious list. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know how you would rank the Espada based on their performance in the Arrancar arc. This is a lot more difficult, I think, than the captains or the Stern Ritter, as the Espada really do have a pretty rough time of it, as I think this list likely illustrated. Were there any points for the individual Espada that I maybe forgot or missed out? I'd love for you guys to let me know down in the comments. But that's it for me today. Once again, I do hope you enjoyed the video. Consider hitting subscribe for more just like this if you haven't done already, and check out Mr. Tomo Talks Games. Maybe give us a subscribe over there as well. It would be massively appreciated. And I want to end the video as I always do by saying a huge thank you and giving a massive shout out to my wonderful supporters over on Patreon. Each and every one of you are appreciated so very much, and you basically make this channel tick, so it really does mean the absolute world. Alright everyone, once again, thank you so very much for watching. Until next time, I'll catch you later. I'll see you then.